The agoraphobia seemed to be gone. After over a decade, he finally felt at ease in his own skin and would have no problem stepping outside and sharing a conversation with just about anyone. Problem was, he wasn't trying to make friends and gather social media handles. He was assigned to poisoning his blood so he could extricate some answers he was anxious to know. The newfound eagerness to make new friends was encouraging if you're looking for silver linings. He overcame this high real quick. No matter how comfortable he would be chatting up the man on the elevator he'd been avoiding most of his life, he could always find solace within the walls of his apartment. That was just what he had in store for tonight. Another fresh bottle of Reposado and a few ramen packets. He didn't get too much into the Mexican lager last night, so he had a surplus. This was actually rather beneficial since he had a king's hangover. He decided to start early and roll this hangover over with some beer, salt, lime, and hot sauce. He fixed that cocktail once and then stuck with straight beer from the can. Costello tidied up around the apartment and set up his bar station so he wouldn't have to fiddle with anything as the inebriation started. He also propped that photo of Grans up against the centerpiece and gave it a tap. Something was unsettling. He sat at his dining table, wrapping his fingers on the pine top like a 1950s poker player waiting for his opponent to call a $50 raise after he'd just bluffed with 2 jacks. No matter how many times he imagined that scenario, the opponent folded every single time. Everything was stagnant. Maybe he situated the environment too much. Over-sanitizing can lead to raging anxiety because really, now what's there to worry about? He stuck with his set. It was better to be ready for nothing than not ready for something. A quote from good old Grans. Costello cracked his 4th beer and got that very familiar sensation of wanting to see what the 5th was going to taste like. He shoved 2 cans in the freezer and picked up the pace. He asked his smart home device to play music he played frequently. Kendrick Lamar's Damn began, and Costello nodded in approval. He scrolled his phone for anything worthwhile to look at on social media. He wasn't much for posting his own content, but didn't mind looking at others oversharing. He fancied himself a connoisseur of content, picking out those who fluffed up their feed well beyond their true existence. None of it mattered. Truth was now as relevant as opinions on headwear. In 2021, politicians felt it best to rewrite their own history and create narratives soothing to their voters. They never went full George Orwell and erased the past, but they were quick to gaslight their base on the fly to garner support, all while nibbling away at democracy for power. Americans live in perpetual gridlock while the 2-party system maintains a host of demagogues who do nothing to work for their constituents. Every task at hand is accusing the opposition party of destroying America. As long as the people have broadband, devices, and an occasional shot at the internet lottery, they could care less about the battle for unitary control of their government. Costello briefly feared a totalitarian takeover until he realized in order to maintain a sense of freedom in America, neither party would ever end the long-standing democracy the country held up to the rest of the world. If either party allowed the other to establish unitary control, then what in the world would they have to argue about anymore? So Costello ran his thumb up the screen of his phone and watched people dance for clicks, completely oblivious to this charade. As though he hadn't seen any of it, it infuriated him again. He knew damn well he'd been participating in this evolutionary decline for years. Regardless, he tossed his phone at the curtains and shoved his head in the refrigerator. He came out with a beer and then had an exhilarating moment when he remembered there were 2 in the freezer. His real world became brighter than the technological world. Sad as it seemed, these are memorable moments. Don't record it. Don't post it. Don't share it. Grab these nearly frozen beers and sit at the dining table like a king who just conquered the entire Northern Territory. Then he remembered he had a much more important, yet surreptitious, mission to accomplish. The tequila knocked his dick in the dirt last night, so tonight he was going to be a much better chemist with the booze. Get the high puttering with the beer and then integrate the tequila. 2 birds, 1 stone. Keep his philosophical self chattering while building the buzz, and this should send the invitations out to his imaginary friends while letting them know he's ready for any conversation they send his way. Costello slid a piece of aluminum foil over and armed himself with a red Sharpie. He had a wave come over him to kick the evening off with a welcoming toast for whoever showed up. Here's to peacefully running errands, dystopian underworlds, and a heroic phoenix rising from your mountain of burning trash. This toast culminated so much of his current ethos, and after he scribbled it down, he immediately recognized he'd been doing a damn good job wrangling his personal energy. He felt a steadiness in his shoulders and was very confident he was entering into this evening as the alpha. This air of confidence invigorated him so much he immediately poured his first pint of tequila. He squeezed 2 limes into the very heavy neat pour and dashed a handful of sea salt into the glass. He lowered his perspective and watched the salt dissolve as it fell to the bottom of the glass. He experienced a moment of duality filled with beauty and visceral visuals, while juxtaposed with the memory of a horrible experience in Austin, Texas years ago. He ordered a Cadillac Margarita Rocks. The bartender, having no clue what Costello ordered, put a scoop of ice in a pint glass and followed it up with about 12 ounces of shit Blanco tequila. He cut 2 limes and squeezed them into the glass and slid it over to Costello. He didn't say a word and choked down the worst drink he'd ever been served. It was followed up with 20 minutes of retching in a Texas dive bar, purging straight shit Blanco, steak and eggs. After becoming a professional drinker, Costello integrated this Texas special into his personal menu, just taking the tequila selection up a few shelves and occasionally adding some sea salt. This cocktail went down like stream water after a hike in the Angeles Mountains with bong rips of a sativa-dominant hybrid. The next one didn't quite find its way into the glass entirely, and Costello picked up on an expeditious buzz. He'd learned in his years of drinking that many times on a back-to-back, the alcohol commingled with any residual from the previous night, and they high-fived as their collaboration packed a stronger punch. He tightened his belt and readied himself for round 2. Just as he pressed play on Elton John's Madman Across the Water, he sensed a presence. It wasn't quite who he expected. Sitting across from him, rather aloof, was what looked like Manny from the bike shop he worked at when he first moved from New Hampshire to Los Angeles. Costello wasn't quite sure how to address Manny. Had he passed and Costello was unaware? Or were we now understanding these visitors were constructed directly from the architecture of Costello's memories? He was in no condition to begin a small investigation into the life of Manny, so he just went with the narrative. Manny didn't wait for Costello to even break the ice. He jumped right into conversation. Manny said, "I hate to tell you this, Aaron, but you need to pay very close attention to what the rest of us are about to tell you. You aren't going to be pleased with yourself. I wasn't there in Seattle, but I've heard what others are saying. The ones with you will explain further. I'm just the attention grabber, and I hope I got my job done." Costello responded, "I've missed you, Manny. You know, you showed me it was okay to find humor in life, even when it's stifled by those who think remaining stoic and au courant is how to cater to the consumer. Far too many humans walk the earth with no sense of humor. I may have stumbled down that path had you not been there to show me it was safe to laugh." Manny very seriously told Costello, "Today, I'm here to tell you to find a fragment of that seriousness and listen closely to what you're about to hear. Find a way to be that heroic phoenix rising from the mountain of burning trash." Costello offered what appeared to be Manny a drink. Without looking away, without averting his eyes, Manny was just gone. Costello couldn't articulate the departure he didn't see. It happened right in front of his very eyes, but was so visceral. He began to realize these guests were all part of a script he'd built inside of his head many years ago. What terrified him was it seemed like they had been rehearsing without his knowledge. He had to maintain his alpha poise. Costello began to get back on the horse he'd fallen off years ago. He shuffled over to his curtains and picked up his phone. Checked the storage and bumped up his cloud storage a few terabytes. Setting up his camera for recording, he killed his third pint. Just as he poured pint number 4, he heard a rhythmic knock at the door. Not exactly what he was expecting. He ignored the knock, and the second knock, and the third. Then the doorbell. What the fuck was so important? He peered through the peephole, and there stood the apartment manager. "How's it going, Seth?" Costello said through the door. "We put flyers in everyone's mailbox about a wine and cheese hospitality tonight, Aaron. We never got an RSVP, and everyone knows you're an expert in the wine department, so who better to help us with pairing? It's down in the lobby and started like 10 minutes ago. We'd love to see you there," Seth pleaded. "Sounds fantastic, Seth. I'm waiting on a FaceTime from an old friend who I ran into while getting coffee and can't miss it. If something changes, in the words of Mia Wallace, I'll be there in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail." Seth walked off without a response. He heard right through the bullshit, or maybe he heard the tequila slur jumping off of Costello's face. Either way, there would be no wine and cheese for him. Maybe next week, though. Sounds like a nice gesture for tenants. About fucking time. Where were we? Phone camera set up, blood alcohol probably already a solid .20, and Costello could pick the pebble from your hand if you challenged him in this moment. He's in full alpha mode. Then the grainy son of a bitch sat there like a pissed off dad with every bit of evidence to prove your culpability. "Your arrogance is embarrassing. You invited us here, and the best you've got is something about peacefully running errands. We spent a lot of years making your trips to do errands as difficult as possible, and you're going to preempt us with some doty toast full of levity and mousiness? We built you, kid," the grainy shadow said with disappointment. "Who are you?" Costello asked. "Who we are is not important. Who you are, on the other hand, that should be what you're asking. Who you are and what you've done," the image growled. "Drink up, young man. How about a toast? Here's to dreams of crippled soldiers crossing the bridge to Valhalla before the firebird catches their scent." The shadow sat still. "Aren't you going to raise your glass?" Costello stammered. "Your glass has enough for both of us. Drink it down." The shadow began to thin. Costello lifted his glass in honor of the toast and sent the bottom of that pint glass straight up. He finished the entire pour and dropped the glass, shattering a glass he'd snuck out of a local cocktail bar in shame. At least now the evidence was destroyed, and he could get that off of his chest. His head hit the table inches from broken glass, and the night came to an abrupt ending.